For centuries, the mysterious frozen continent at the bottom of the world, Antarctica, has eluded explorers and was often referred to as Terra Australis Incognita. Let's look at the early theories and the first sightings. In 1642, Abel Tasman heard rumours of a land rich in vegetation with a temperate climate to the south, and he decided to head there. He actually reached what we now know to be New Zealand and surmised that it was part of a large continent stretching over the south. In 1773, Captain James Cook, already known for claiming parts of New Zealand and parts of Australia for the British Empire, was promoted to commander and sent to explore the southern hemisphere. On his second Pacific voyage, Cook crossed the Antarctic Circle multiple times, making his crew the first known men to do so. While he didn't see the Antarctic mainland, he encountered a vast expanse of ice and he discovered several islands. Next, the 19th century. In 1819, William Smith, an English merchant travelling from Buenos Aires to Chile, skillfully avoided a storm at Cape Horn and ended up at the South Shetland Islands, which were not on the maps. These islands, rich in fur seal populations, were very close to Antarctica. Despite initial disbelief from the authorities, Smith's report sparked a fur seal rush with over 100 ships visiting the location, and within 5 years all the seals were wiped out. Smith died penniless, but he had opened up knowledge of routes to Antarctica. In 1820, Fabian Gottlieb von Bellinghausen and Mikhail Lazarev were commissioned by the Russian Admiralty to follow Captain Cook's route. They were the first to see the Antarctic mainland on January 27, 1820. In 1821, a year later, British sealer John Davies may have been the first to set foot on the Antarctic continent, though this remains disputed. In 1823, James Weddell, a sealer with a background in the Navy and the Merchant Navy, travelled several times to the southern seas. In 1823, he and his crew reached the southernmost point recorded at that time, and since 1900 this sea has been known as the Weddell Sea. In 1830, a flurry of discovery activity occurred, with John Biscoe sighting land which he named Enderby Land after his employer and Graham Land after the First Lord of the Admiralty. There was some contention as the Americans argued that Graham Land was actually Palmer Land because Nathaniel Palmer from America had already named it a few years before. In 1839, American Charles Wilkes led a small platoon of ships with scientists and mineralogists on board, sailing along the pack ice for thousands of miles and sighting land on several occasions. The land he sighted is known as Wilkes Land. In 1839, at the same time, another known explorer, the dashing James Clark Ross, who had already made a name for himself with extensive Arctic exploration with his uncle Sir John Ross and Sir William Parry, managed to stamp his mark on parts of Antarctica. Ross had already located the North Magnetic Pole and he wanted to do the same in the Antarctic. His ships were the very well-known Erebus and Terror, which he named the two Antarctic volcanoes after. Unfortunately, he could not get past a massive ice shelf, which was later named the Ross Ice Shelf after him, and so he retreated. For the next 50 years, interest in exploring Antarctica faded, with a greater fascination in polar regions and the elusive Northwest Passage. But by the end of the 19th century, there was a renewed interest in commercial whaling and sealing operations and adventurers eager to discover the mysteries at the bottom of the world. Next comes the heroic age of exploration, my favourite part. Between 1892 to 1894, Carl Anton Larsen, a Norwegian whaler, travelled to Antarctica to see if he could find whales. During this trip, he discovered many areas of Antarctica, including the Larsen Ice Shelf, on which he became the first person to ski on the mainland. He also discovered the Foyne Coast in Graham Land, King Oscar Land and Robertson Island. He reported back regarding the active volcanoes and he brought home many fossils which were the first to be obtained from the area. He was even the first to record an emperor penguin colony, one which was not recorded again until 2014. Larsen would return again to Antarctica later in his career. Next, the Belgian Antarctic expedition of 1897 to 1899. The ship Belgica, led by Belgian naval officer Adrien de Gerlache, became stuck in pack ice for over a year, enduring a harsh winter, and some of the crew were driven to the point of madness. On board this ship was Frederick Cook, the doctor, and he went hunting to supplement the rations, which probably saved a lot of lives on that ship. And there was a very young Roald Amundsen. In 1899, a Norwegian expedition led by Borchgrevink claimed to be the first to set foot on Antarctica, although this is disputed. Borchgrevink's team established a new furthest south at 78 degrees and 50 minutes. In 1902, the German Gauss expedition led by Erich von Drygalski gathered extensive scientific information despite being trapped in the ice for over a year. In 1903, Swedish Antarctic expedition led by Otto Nordenskjöld faced shipwreck, but they made significant scientific discoveries too. The early 1900s see a revival of Antarctic exploration linked to national prestige, leading to what has since been described as Antarctic mania. Between 1902 and 1904, Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery expedition marked further southern exploration. A young Ernest Shackleton was part of the crew, and Scott returned to the UK after this trip in 1904, a national hero. In 1905, the French led an expedition to chart several hundred miles of the Antarctic coastline. So there was a lot of activity at this point. Between 1907 and 1909, Ernest Shackleton returned to the south with his Nimrod expedition, reaching 88 degrees 23 minutes, just 97 nautical miles from the South Pole. So close. But he made the brave decision to return so that everybody would survive. He actually wrote in his journal, "Our food lies ahead." On his return to Great Britain, he was knighted, he was turned into a waxwork at Madame Tussauds, and the expedition did also reach the magnetic South Pole. Here's the big one. In 1910 to 1912, Scott returned with his Terra Nova expedition, which is legendary for its tragic end. Scott and his team reached the South Pole, but they perished on the return journey shortly after learning that Roald Amundsen had beaten him to it a month before. In 1912, it was a busy year, 1912, for Antarctic exploration, but in 1912, Australian explorer Douglas Mawson embarked on a scientific expedition after a tragic series of events, which I will go into in another video because they deserve a video of their own, including his crewmate going mad and biting off his own fingers. Mawson survived a harrowing solo journey back to safety, exemplifying remarkable endurance. In 1915, Shackleton's Endurance expedition became legendary for its own miraculous survival after the ship was crushed by pack ice. And I have sort of done a video on this regarding Mrs. Chippy, who was the ship's cat. Now we're at the modern era. Between 1929 to the 1930s, adventurers began exploring Antarctica by air. Hubert Wilkins and Lincoln Ellsworth made significant flights over uncharted terrain. In the 1930s, Ingrid Christensen, who I've already also done a video on, became the first woman to see, set foot on and fly over the Antarctic mainland across 3 separate visits. In the mid-20th century, in 1957, International Geophysical Year saw 12 countries conducting significant scientific research in Antarctica. In 1958, Vivian Fuchs and Edmund Hillary completed the first overland crossing of Antarctica via the South Pole. In 1961, the Antarctic Treaty banned military activity on the continent and guaranteed scientific freedom, establishing a firm governance structure that's still respected there today. And nowadays, thousands of scientists work on the continent at any one time, and even cruise ships visit this desolate yet fascinating place. An incredible history of a unique, desolate continent. Apsley Cherry Garrard's words perhaps best encapsulate it. Antarctica, the end of the world, which is the face of pale death and which has a human spirit amidst all desolate glory. From the early theorists to the daring expeditions that mapped its frozen landscape, Antarctica remains one of the most fascinating and challenging frontiers on Earth. It is a land of extremes where the resilience of the human spirit is tested against nature's wrath and beauty. The story of Antarctica is a testament to the courage, curiosity, and unwavering determination that define humanity.